Need some new Innistrad Midnight Hunt cards? Well, you can order them now from our sponsor, Card Kingdom, by heading over to cardkingdom.com. Hello everyone, and welcome to a super fun video. So, every set release...
Video.
Spooky video, indeed.
Getting ready for fall.
Every set release, once we get the full spoiler, we like to talk about what cards from the set might actually have an impact in constructed formats. And to do this, I'm always joined by the ever awesome Crim, probably better known as the Asian Avenger. How's it going today, Crim?
Hey, Seth. I'm excited, mostly because the biggest thing to come from Innistrad is rotation.
Oh, me too. Today we're talking standard. If the rotation hint wasn't a giveaway, we're talking top 10 standard cards from Innistrad Midnight Hunt. And this is a really exciting set release, not just because Innistrad is sweet and spooky, but because the Wicked Witch of the format, Eldraine, with the Bone Crushers and the Love Struck Beast and like 20 other cards, half of them already banned, like it's finally gone. So we get to try these sweet new Innistrad cards in a brand new format, which is probably the most exciting part about all this, but Innistrad's sweet too. And we had a lot of really cool cards to talk about today. I'm really hyped for this list, Grim. It's going to be a good one.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that the set that's meant to be about scary things isn't the scariest. It's actually Eldraine. So, but yeah, now that the rest of standard sets are unbanned, we can actually just go and talk about the newest one coming in.
Yeah, so today we're counting down top 10 Innistrad Midnight Hunt cards for standard, post-rotation standard. Like usual, we have our individual list also posted. This is a combined list. Me and Crim each made a top 10 list. You can find it in the article over on mtggoldfish.com if you care about that sort of thing. We mashed it together to talk about our overall top 10 cards, also excluding lands. We all know the land cycle, no matter how good or bad it is, they always see play in standard because you just need whatever dual lands exist. So they would always be number one on the list. So instead of just always having our list end with dual lands, we exclude those even though we're going to see standard play. So anyway, are you ready for this, Crim? Are you ready to count down our top 10 Innistrad cards for standard?
Seth, it's been 2 years. I don't have to say Bone Crusher Giant is going to kill this. I am ready. Let's go.
Oh, it's so nice not to be like, oh, this card could be good, but Bone Crusher Giant, or oh, only if Love Struck Beast didn't exist. Like this card could be good. We don't got to do that anymore. So, all right, let's count it down. We're starting with 2 honorable mentions. These are cards that both Crim and I agreed are going to see a lot of standard play, but they're not super exciting to talk about. And those 2 cards are Consider, our new upgraded Opt, Inferno Grasp, our new upgraded Doomblade. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if when we look back on standard 6 months, a year from now, that these cards are heavily played in top tier decks, but they're very similar to older cards and there's just not a lot to say about them. So we figured throw them in honorable mentions so we could spend time talking about the cooler cards. Crim, any thoughts on these 2?
They're going to be amazing, right? These are going to be format staples. It's like, hey, check out the new and improved Swamp, right? Like, it's like, we don't really need to talk about that. I'm sure we collectively as a Magic community and kind of can tell what that is. And for the newer players getting into the game, these cards, if you don't have them, these are the staples. I think you should craft these instantly. And they're usually at common, uncommon, except for the lands. So, I'm sure you have excess wild cards. If you don't, save them for these.
And as we'll see in future days, when we get back to a historic, perhaps, these are cards that you're going to use in your arena collection, even after they rotate from standard, most likely. They're just really good cards in multiple formats. So anyway, those are our honorable mentions. Let's move into our top 10 list proper, starting with number 10 on our list. And, having Crim here, there's no way we couldn't include the new TEFERI. Crim, the biggest TEFERI fanboy in the multiverse. What do you think of this TEFERI, Crim? A little different than past TEFERIs, but still good enough to come in on our list. What's it going to do in standard?
Yes. That's my answer. Yes. I love this card. This is definitely on a salt meter, this is much lower, which is unfortunate. And so I'm a little, I'm salty that this isn't making me saltier. So I'm a little bit of a sodium filled guy. Otherwise, I think that this card plays a little different than we're used to, from a Teferi, because this is probably going to be better in something like, if there's a blue-white tempo deck, a spirits deck, anything like that, this is way better. Of course, there's the Christmas land dream of like mana dork and everything. And then it's like, oh, you just paid 1 mana. It's 1 fairy, but I don't think that's going to happen in standard. Not and at the cost of doing that, I think it's just like, okay, well, that wasn't that great. So, for me, I think this is better that just like as a like a tempo play for your creature decks, your like low to the ground decks, and in these colors too, right? We've seen that already. There's a few spirits. There's a lot of things like that going on already. Maybe mono white splashes blue, because you get card value with the -2, you get to tap stuff down, you get to untap your own creatures or your own mana and do all of that. So, that's just really good. I think it's going to be solid for any kind of tempo deck.
Yeah, I think that's where Teferi fits as well. And I actually like this Teferi. Not as much of a fan as of our last 2 Teferis, because they're just, oh my god, so miserable to play against. But this one doesn't seem miserable. This seems actually like pretty fun and powerful. Teferi, but not in a broken way. And I agree 100% that this is a card you want in creature decks. Unlike our last 2 Teferis, which are basically Drago control cards, or that's their most prevalent home. This one you want a bunch of creatures. You can the best way to protect it is untapping a creature. I like that it combos with like Immarath. You can get in your attack and then untap it to turn the ward back on is kind of a cute synergy. And we do have mana dorks in the format. I don't think you want to go full on Live the Dream mode, but I can imagine some sort of like Bant just stuff deck, Bant mid-range, where you're just playing good things and you play like a Tangled Floral Hedron and ramp into Teferi and then untap your Tangled Floral Hedron or whatever. So I like this card a bit, and it's going to be interesting to see what it can do in our new standard format.
Yeah, I mean, like, and the funny thing is, you could actually, as I think about it as we go on, there are more creatures now, even in control decks. Because as you had mentioned, Meredith, but then also creature lands. So you attack with the land, you untap that as a creature, then you untap another land, so that's 2 mana.
And, I mean, if you do want to go full-on Live the Dream mode, we do have an artifact land and treasure vault in standard. So, in theory, you can turn this into Teferi Hero Dominaria, play it, untap the artifact land in a normal land, and then saw it coming and do that kind of stuff. So, all right, let's move on. Number 9 on our list, we have maybe the best white removal spell printed in a standard set in a bunch of years. Fateful Absence, 2 mana instant, kill a creature or a planeswalker, give your opponent a clue. I love this card, Crim, but what do you think about this one? This
is really, really good. WotC has now made it so that pretty much planeswalkers aren't what they used to be. They died a good amount of stuff now. So for those planeswalker haters, I'm sure you're happy. I love planeswalkers, but I also love a good answer to a planeswalker. So this is just solid. And most importantly, it's instant speed. When I read this, I was like, oh, this is really good. Then I realized, it sucks that it's sorcery. Turns out it's not sorcery. So this makes it infinitely better, and probably one of the premier removal spells for quite some time in standard.
Yeah, I think the upside of hitting a planeswalker is so massive with this spell. I think that is really the selling point. You're going to play it in your deck to kill creatures primarily, but one of the downsides with these removal spells, let's compare to Declaration in Stone, which was our similar white removal spell last time we went to Innistrad, is that only hits creatures. When you run into the control deck that is playing only Teferi to win the game, and there are decks like that in Standard 2022. We've seen like blue-black control with Lolth and Morden Canaan and no real creatures. The problem is you run into those decks and you have this spell and it's just a dead card. You can't do anything with it. The flexibility of being able to snag a planeswalker against control makes this so much more main deck playable. Plus, white is going to be scary. Like this and Skyclave Apparition together is so much flexible removal for some sort of white aggro deck. So I'm really high on this card, and I'm expecting this to be like a 4 of main deck card in everything from like white aggro decks to control style decks potentially.
Yeah, it's good in every deck, so.
Let's move on to number 8 on our list. We're staying in the world of white cards, and I think this card is maybe a little bit overlooked and not getting all the credit it deserves, and that is SUNGOLD Sentinel. And I know, Crim, this is one that you're high on, so why don't you tell us about what you think it can do in Standard?
This is a 2-drop that, first off, goes when it's a solid stat. It has no weird wonky, it's just an all-around good card. If you remember, we played Death Gorge Scavenger. We played that. That was 3 mana in its standard life. Well, and graveyards weren't even that prominent then. But now with it, this is just an improved version, right? And with so many things mattering from the graveyard, this enters the battlefield, exiles something, and then when it attacks, you get to exile something again. And you could choose from a graveyard. It doesn't seem like much, but that could be relevant hitting your own stuff too. So, this has all of that, and then has Coven in a color that has no shortage of ways of getting different attack powers. Coven, I think, is efficient when you have it's better than Party. Because, Party's unplayable, I think, but this is, Coven is better because you can get a good variety of powers in mono white and for cheap. So that's the big deal here. And so when that happens, then it becomes an upgraded 3/2. Like it can't be blocked by creatures of that color once you activate it. So this is just a solid 2-drop all around, and it hates graveyards, which is huge. From this set, we've seen all the flashback spells, all the disturb cards. This is just a good 2-drop, and it's main deckable.
Yeah, I mean, this is just a really solid card. I was surprised when this card was first spoiled and I was doing a little bit of research and trying to find comparisons. This is the first time that white has gotten a 3/2 for 2 that doesn't have like a big downside, like needs another creature to attack to be able to attack or something. So these are kind of historic stats on a white creature. We already have good white decks. It's got a natural home that can fit in. It's even a human, which could be relevant as we continue to see the rest of Innistrad. And as you said, even though I don't really like Coven very much in general, if there's one deck that can really make it work, it's probably going to be some sort of white aggro deck with Luminarch Aspire, which makes it really easy to move counters around and get those different powers of creatures. And then you have this really difficult to kill threat that could even compare to some of the Season Hollowblade type stuff almost that we've had in past standards, where it's just going to be very difficult to block, very difficult for your opponent to actually kill, and it's going to grow with those counters. So yeah, and incidental graveyard hate is going to be really big, even bigger in this new Innistrad format than in a lot of other formats, because we have so many graveyard mechanics, as you mentioned. So yeah, I think this card is definitely 4 of main deck potential in white aggro and white X aggro decks.
Yeah, I know that we've been used to an Innistrad or an Eldraine standard, so this isn't flashy, but this is just very good.
But it dies to Bone Crusher, Crim. It gets stomped.
You're okay, Seth. You can go out. We can go outside now. We can play standard now. We're fine. I know. It's a concept.
It's going to take me like 3 months to stop thinking that way. Well, let's move on. Number 7 on our list. We have Malevolent Hermit / Benevolent Geist, a new counter spell on a trick, which to me, I don't know if you ever watch Always Sunny, Crim. This looks like Pappy McPoyle to me. I don't know if you ever saw the father of that family. It looks just like it. You just need the bird to come out from under the hat. But anyway, Crim, this is a Crim card. What do you think about this counter spell on a stick in standard?
Okay, if you know anything about me and you know all my tastes, first off, it's a wizard. It's a blue wizard, and one of my favorite cards is Void Mage Prodigy. So this card isn't quite exactly that, but it's like the Kirkland brand. So but still good enough, right? Because in this standard format, being able to sacrifice to counter some non-creature spell and then have it go into the graveyard. It's good against control decks, but it's all and it's even better because it can counter. I think everything now has a nice mixture. With where Magic has gone, every deck has a nice mixture of non-creatures versus creatures, even control decks, right? So this is just something that you could play to counter any big spells like Planeswalkers and things like that. And also when it dies, it still comes back as a body. And it has the minor upside of also making so your stuff can't be countered. So I like that. I think this disturb mechanic, if it's cheap, can be done, and I love that. Okay, Disturb, is that at sorcery speed? That is at sorcery speed.
It is.
Yes.
It is. Yeah, you got to cast it whenever you can cast a creature.
Right.
So if you give your creature spells flash, I think you could cast it as an instant. But yeah, in general, it's sorcery speed.
Well, unfortunately, if only it had flash. But still, I still think it's really good, regardless. So I love that. I think the fact that you just have this card that is a body while also could serve as a counterspell, even if it gets killed, it can come back. Just overall, anything, a creature flashback is good.
Yeah, I actually think this card's pretty interesting for standard. It's pretty on curve on both halves, which is what I like. We've seen some Disturb cards where the Disturb cost is like 6 mana or something, but this one, the front side is fine, and then the back side, 3 mana for a 2/2 flying that has a pretty relevant ability, that's also pretty fairly costed. Like, I could imagine the backside being a standalone card, and I wouldn't think twice about it. Like, that would be like a legitimate cost for that effect. It seems good it's interesting, in like tempo decks to fight against control, where you get this down, and your opponent's going to see it sitting there, but they're going to need to find a way to deal with that before they can like cast their Doomscar and Wrath your board or whatever.
Yeah.
And it feels
like
good
a Mausoleum
in control.
Wanderer, right? Like you see those kind of cards.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It kind of is, and it's only 1 mana to sacrifice it, so you don't need to leave up a ton of mana. Voidmage Prodigy was 2 mana, I think, to sacrifice something, so it's a little more efficient. And then the backside seems good in control decks, too, to some extent, where I could imagine you wanting to resolve a big Planeswalker, your Teferi or something to win the game, and you can like cast this out of your graveyard in the late game. If your opponent counters that, then they're probably not going to have the mana to counter the non-creature you were trying to resolve. If they don't counter it, then they can't counter your stuff anyway, and you're going to be able to resolve your big non-creature spell. Yeah. So it is a really interesting design. And yeah, this is, I think, one of the best Disturb cards that we've seen for sure.
Seriously, it's so powerful. And once again, blue-white Teferi with spirits.
Yeah, that could actually be good, especially like spirits right now. I'm in wait and see mode, but we know we're getting more Innistrad. We know we're getting Kamigawa. Those are 2 spirit heavy sets. So I expect that even if spirits don't get there right now, give it a couple more sets and it probably will.
Yeah.
Let's move on to number 6 on our list. Oh, we got some pretty crazy card draw here in Memory Deluge. And this is a card that I think is really, really powerful. 4 mana, you get 2 cards out of your top 4 cards. So you can flash it back for 7 mana, and then you get 2 cards out of your top 7 cards, which kind of makes it like a dig through time almost. And this is all happening at instant speed. So Crim, you're the biggest control player in the group. My question for you is, we have Behold the Multiverse, which has been kind of the go-to in standard 2022. Do you think this just beats it out? Is Behold the Multiverse move over, Memory Deluge takes its place? Like, how does that work in standard, you think?
Although this costs technically more mana by 2, right? The front side, that is still like you kind of like look at top 4 and then you just pick 2. That's that's like almost the same. But the issue here is, or the upside here is that this is flashback. So you get to do it again. And I think that's the biggest thing here. You get to do it again. So I like this a little bit more than Behold the Multiverse, just because of that.
I think that's where I come down to. Behold is nice because you can split up the cost thanks to Foretell, but this is just a more powerful effect. As you said, 2 out of your top 4 is better than Scry 2, Draw 2. You're seeing more cards for sure. And then that flashback seems pretty game ending. Like what I'm envisioning is you're playing some sort of mid-range or control deck and you're going back and forth, and then you cast this early in the game and, draw a couple of cards. In the late game, after everyone trades off their resources, the person who has the Memory Deluge chilling in their graveyard to almost tutor 7 cards deep. Like that's a lot of cards to see to find what you need. That's the person that is probably going to end up winning the game. So I think that flashback, as you said, that is a really, really huge deal for when the game goes long. Its expense means I don't think we're going to see aggro decks play it really. It's going to be more of a mid-range or control style card. But in those decks, this seems like a slam dunk auto include, one of the best card advantage spells and selection spells that you could have in your deck.
Yep. Full agree.
Let's move on to number 5 on our list. We have an interesting green 3-drop, Augur of Autumn, combining together, I don't know, Courser of Crucifix almost with Vivian's Effect or Vizier the Menagerie, like being able to play lands off the top of your deck at any time. And then if you have Coven playing creatures off the top of your deck as well, that seems really powerful. Crim, what are you thinking about this one in Standard?
I'm not going to lie to you, for those listening and watching, this was the first thing I put up probably on the list here of cards, which is really weird because I hate green. But I also recognize power, right? And like that just seems at a very good rate. This is super Courser, right? You don't gain the life, but the fact that here is like you get to play creatures if you have Coven. And it's not hard when you already have like a bunch of green cards that are wildly costed, randomly costed. And then on top of that, this you can curve, you can play your Jasperi Sentinel, and then you go into Ranger class, and then you play this. That's already like, you know, like of course you won't be able to Coven right away but you don't have the mana anyways. But like the thing here is there's so many things in green that can also vary in like power. This card is just solid. It doesn't die to new shock, play with fire, and it being an X3 seems to be like Frostbite's going to be really taxed in the new format because there's a lot of X3s and things that are above 2. So, this just seems very good. It's an all-around solid creature. Once again, the effect, nothing. I don't need to state any more than you get to play lands off the top, you get to play a creature off the top with Coven. That's really good.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a powerful card. I think my only concern for it in Standard is we got a lot of powerful 3-drops between Old Growth Troll, we're getting Briarberry Tracker, we got the new green Mythic Wolf thing that has the pseudo kicker ability. So there's a lot of cards kind of competing for the 3-drop slot. However, we also still have landfall synergies in the format, and cards like this are insane with landfall. So even if this doesn't,
Elemental,
even if this doesn't show up in like mono green Stompy, I think that there is definitely a home for it alongside the Brushfire Elementals and the Lotus Cobras and those type of synergies, because it compares to really powerful cards in the back. Courser saw a ton of play, it still sees play to some extent in older formats, and then we've seen the playing creatures off the top with stuff like Ranger class or various Vivians also see a lot of play. Mashing those together, the card's gotta be good. It's just, sure it dies, but if it sticks out on the battlefield, this is a 3-drop that can essentially just win you the game by itself with card advantage.
Which is green, essentially, but yes.
Let's move on. Number 4 on our list. We have one of my favorite cards from the entire set, Suspicious Stowaway / Seafaring Werewolf. So this card, 2-mana 1/1, can't be blocked. When it deals combat damage, loot. If you flip it around, you get a 2/1 and get to draw cards. I've played a lot of Looter Elcors. Looter Elcor is always, I've had a soft spot in that card, and it's very similar. It's got Shadow, you get to loot when it hits your opponent. It's one of my favorite cube cards to play. So seeing this in Standard is really exciting. But there's a lot of synergies for this card, which makes it even more exciting. We have flashback spells, we got Disturb, we have all these things that want to be in the graveyard. And then this is also a rogue, so it works with like Zerasan. We're going towards Kamigawa, which is probably going to have ninjutsu. This seems like one of the best ninjutsu effects. And then if you flip this around, you're getting like a cheaper, better Shadow Mage Infiltrator. Just straight up can't be blocked. It's drawing a card. What is there to not like about this card? I could even see the comparison to like Jace Vryn's Prodigy to some extent. Is this 2-drop looter that maybe people slept on a little bit when it was released, and then it became really, really strong. And this can even block. This isn't can't be blocked and can't block. This is just can't be blocked. So you can even jump with it if you need to. All around, I think this card is just, it's so insane. And I think this card's going to see a ton of play. Crim, I've been rambling. What do you think about this one?
I don't think there's anything you've said that I couldn't say about it. Like, I mean, like everything you said is true, right? Rather than reiterating, I'll just say that it's all true. It's amazing. It's as good as listed. Please don't be our circle of loyalty this set. But I love this card for all the same reasons Seth has mentioned. So this is just a very, very strong and efficient card.
Yeah, it's a good one, and I cannot wait to play with this card. Well, let's move on. Number 3 on our list. We got another Planeswalker, and I kind of feel like Red and 7 isn't really getting the hype it deserves because it was spoiled so early. It was spoiled as one of the first card on the early access day. And then we got all these cool new spoilers and everyone's focused on the new cards. But WRENN 7, it's a really powerful planeswalker with 4 abilities that can make huge tokens and fill your graveyard, which we've been talking about throughout our top 10, is going to be relevant in Innistrad Standard. So, Crim, what do you think about our new WRENN?
Well, as you all know, I love my 5-drop green planeswalkers. When I say that, when I say love, I use love very, very sarcastically. But the thing here is, this card is exactly that. It's another 5-mana green planeswalker. Not quite Nissa who shakes the world, but still very powerful. The ability to +1, fill our yard, get a land out of it, pretty major, especially when you can just get a tree folk token at some point. And then, of course, you only need to activate that 0 once to be like a billion lands ahead of your opponent, right? Like, sure, some would say that by that time, WRENN 7, when it comes down, this may actually only put 2 lands down, but that's still really good. In a game, in a format where like there's like mana leak effects and whatnot, you're able to like pay for all of that. If party takes off and they have that 1 mana spell pierce, you can pay for that. Of course, I don't know how you slip this past that, but like the thing here is I think that 0 is very solid, and probably oddly overlooked right now. And I think that this card as a whole is just kind of underrated right now. And I think it is very powerful, and people are going to see that because they just aren't, when you look at the scope of what Standard's going to be, this is a very powerful card compared, like, it's not what it, like, the old formats level of power, but this is still very good in new Standard.
Yeah, it just does a little bit of everything. You have the card advantage +1 that then fuels the 0 for the ramping, as you were talking about. And even if you're not, if you're a dedicated ramp deck, it's obviously super helpful. But even if you're not, there are reasons that you just want to have a lot of mana on the battlefield, and you even have a reason on WRENN 7. And the thing that really sells me on this card is really the -3 that makes that tree folk. Not only are you going to get a big creature that has power and toughness equal to the number of lands you control, so it kind of synergizes with the rest of WRENN 7, but it has reach. And if there's one thing I've learned playing Standard 2022, it's that flying is a big deal in our new format. Some of the best threats are Goldspan Dragons, Galazeth Prismari, even like the White Weenie decks. You have like Elite Spellbinder is a huge threat. So most decks have some sort of flyer that is going to be pressuring your life total, pressuring your planeswalkers, making these huge reach tree folk seem like a really good way to shut down the air attack. So I'm excited for this. And it's also just a way to fill the graveyard. So worst case for this card, even if it isn't a generically good green planeswalker that you just play in any deck, it seems like it's got a home in ramp decks, in graveyard decks, in landfall style decks. And those are all things that are going to be floating around in this format. So there's a lot of different possibilities with WRENN 7.
They won't be flying around though, because that token has reach.
Let's move on. Number 2 on our list, we have our first adversary, our new mythic cycle, and that's a white adversary, Intrepid Adversary. So 2 mana 3/1, you can kick it a bunch of times, make yourself massive based on how many times you kick it, and make it massive with counters. Crim, what do you think about this one?
It curves perfectly. It's a great mana sink. It's always powerful, right? Like at the very worst, it's just a 3/1 lifelink.
Yeah.
What's not to like here? You draw in the later game, it just gets better. It scales. The later the game, the better this is. Simple as that. Like, you don't even have to go and make anything more than +1/+1 for this to be good. You pay 4 mana, you have a 4/2 lifelink, and the rest of your team is anthemed. Anything past that, it's like, well, you're probably dead. But the thing here is, this is just good at all phases of the game. And there's already a mono white aggro deck.
That's very good. Even like there's in Standard 2022 a top tier mono white aggro deck. I think it's one of the top like 3 decks in the format, arguably. So there is already built home for it. And as you said, like it's a 2-drop that's good on turn 2, good on turn 4, and then when everything goes wrong and you're playing a white aggro deck and you get Wrath and the game goes really long, this is probably the card you want to draw off the top most on like turn 8 or turn 10 as well, because you can just kick it a whole bunch of times and make it massive. Yep. So there's really not anything to dislike about this card. It's a finisher. You can just run it out there on turn 2. My only concern with these cards, and a little PSA as we head into our new Standard format, don't be afraid to just run these cards out. The power of the adversary cycle is they are all on curve, just casting them for your mana cost. So don't feel like you got to hold on to this and kick it or double kick it, because the power of this card is you can just run it out on turn 2 and it's a fine card. And you get this bonus where later you're antheming your team or kicking it multiple times and just winning the game. So don't be afraid to just run it out as a 2-drop, because that's what makes the adversary cycle and Intrepid Adversary so powerful.
Yeah. And because like I'm just seeing games where you go like Elite Spellbinder into this, and that's really powerful. So yeah.
Yeah, that is a scary start. I'm pretty scared of mono white. We were talking about their new removal spell. They got good stuff that's remaining in the format. White aggro is going to be a real thing, I think, after rotation. Let's move on. Number 1 on our list. Top card for Standard from Innistrad Midnight Hunt. We have Bloodthirsty Adversary. Another adversary, the red adversary. Crim, what do you think about this one?
I mean, I was literally just streaming Goblin Dark Dwellers. I've been on a Dark Dwelling binge. I played Dark Dwellers in Modern, Standard. This is a Dark Dweller that can scale, right? It has haste itself, by the way. So not only are you casting another spell, it can come in and beat people down. So this is just the adversaries are versatile and they scale very well, like quite well with like whatever game plan you have. So I love that. And it's as simple as that. This can now cast a bunch of spells back and forth. This is good in a control deck. This could be good in an aggro deck in case you want to cast your burn spells again. Like, what's not to love? It's versatile. It goes in every deck that has red.
This card's really, really good. And the reason this is ranked, I would say, above the white one, even though the white one is also very powerful, is if you kick it, it gets value right away, even if it's removed. The only downside of the white adversary is it does just tie to a removal spell. If your opponent has an instant speed way to kill it, and there's some good instant speed removal in our new format, then you don't really get the value out of it. This one, if you cast it for 5 mana and your opponent does have the removal, you're at least flashing back a spell. If 5 mana, if you flash back a 3 mana value spell, it's actually just Snapcaster Mage. Not with flash, but still, it's the same amount of mana as Snapcaster would be to flash back something that had a 3 mana value. Plus, you're getting a 2/2 haste for 2, which is traditionally a pretty playable card in aggressive decks. Like, those are stats that you like. We see it on stuff like Robber of the Rich, that is very, very strong. So yeah, I think Bloodthirsty Adversary, this card is a card you can play in control decks, you can play it in aggro decks. It's even a vampire, which is probably going to be more relevant in a couple of months once we get Crimson Vow, but still, this is definitely deserving of the top spot on our list and a super strong Standard card.
Agreed.
Anyway, I think that brings us to the end of our top 10 Standard cards from Innistrad Midnight Hunt. So you've seen our lists, and if you want to see our individual lists, head over to mbggoldfish.com. I'll even link it in the description below. But let us know in the comments, what are you hyped to play from Innistrad Midnight Hunt in Standard? There's so many sweet cards. If I had a problem with this list, it was cutting it down to 10, because the next 10 cards that didn't quite make this list are still some really sweet cards that I'm really excited about. So this set is just spectacular. So Crim, thanks for hanging out. It's always a blast.
Thanks for doing this.
And thanks for everyone for watching. So again, let us know in the comments what you're hyped for. We'll be back tomorrow to talk about our top 10 historic cards from this set. So tune back in for that, and we will talk to you soon. Looking for even more Innistrad Midnight Hunt coverage? Well, you could check out some of our other awesome videos here and here.